T-minus 17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Go for main engine start. Main engine start. 2, 1. Booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Hey everybody! I hope this message finds everybody safe and healthy and doing well. Welcome to another conversation sheltered in place. We're glad that you're tuning in. The purpose of these conversations is to help folks navigate the current crisis that we're going through, the coronavirus crisis, and not just to get through it and navigate through it, but to get through it stronger and more unified than ever, and to look at this time of not only hardship, but look at this time as a time of opportunity, and an opportunity for us to come together more unified, a time for us to express gratitude and recognition of the awe and wonder that surrounds us constantly, of our family, of our friends, of our coworkers. And it's a time for us to really reflect on what's going on. And so this week's episode, I'm really excited that I have Yobie Benjamin with me today. And part of being able to navigate through this crisis is to know what's going on. And so Yobie has been very, very involved with creating PPE and creating test kits, and is on the front line of trying to provide the tools necessary to get through this. And so I'm just going to cover his bio real quick. It would take me about 3 hours to cover his full bio, but we'll just do a brief version of that. So Yobie Benjamin is a successful entrepreneur, futurist speaker, and he's an internationally recognized expert on unleashing innovation and creating hyper growth. He advises leaders on how to thrive in today's digital era of disruptive technological change. He was named a 2015 Technology Pioneer by the World Economic Forum for his technology achievements in virtual reality, and is an active member of the World Economic Forum's Expert Network. Two companies that he co-founded won a 2014 CNN Top 10 Technology Products Award. Currently, Yobie serves as a partner at PA Consulting, working on product innovation with multinational corporations. He's also the founder and CTO emeritus of Token.io, providing software to banks that enable them to issue a new payment type specifically designed for use in the digital era. Additionally, he's a senior advisor to several startups in the technology and synthetic biology space. He is the former Global Chief Technology Officer for Citibank's Global Transaction Services. He also served as chairman of Citi's Research, Development, Innovation, and Learning Center. Yobie was also a partner and chief of global strategy at Ernst Young and a partner and managing director for the Computer Sciences Corporation. He's also the former chair for a civilian volunteer group, the NASA Ames Collaboration Labs, where he's held this position for 10 years. He's also currently involved in a very innovative material science corporation called Standard Graphene that is bringing on to the world some really amazing new products in the way of material science. And so with that, I want to welcome Yobie. But before I do, I also have to say one last thing about Yobie, and I didn't realize this until we scheduled this, but today's his birthday. So so let's hey Yobie, happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
What a great honor it is that you would not only come and have a chat with me, but have a chat with me on your birthday. That's really kind of you. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, and it's been a while since we were together live, and having a beer over during the World Economic Forum this last January in Davos, Switzerland. And
yeah, that was right before this all hit. That was, weeks before.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like it was and I sometimes wonder, right? Since this is a conversation, this is just a casual conversation between friends. I sometimes wonder what the World Economic Forum had to do had to do with the spread of this virus, because we had
Yeah.
thousands of Chinese and French and Italians who came to Davos, Switzerland during that time,
Right.
just before, and that was the last week of January.
Right. Yeah,
The
I never thought
contagion
of
was
that.
already happening.
Yeah.
And so you don't know if there was a very interesting thing that that it may have played a role in the spread of the virus.
Right, maybe. Probably. Yeah.
I also think about CES, which also happened around these mega conferences.
Right.
You know, may have had something to do with bringing the virus to different countries.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting once we get on the other side of this to see what happens to mega conferences. That might be something that needs to adjust a little bit as we come through the other side.
I'm not so sure that people know that most people right now, Ron, know how infectious this virus is. I mean, in fact, this is probably one of the few diseases on the planet that everybody's heard of.
Yeah.
That's
because it's affected. It's literally affected every single person on the planet. Not infected, but affected. Right.
Yeah, and affected. But the thing about that effect is, like, everybody knows it's very contagious, very infectious. So I'm not so sure that the World Economic Forum, for example, will have an event in January 2020, or are we going to have CES in January 2020? I mean, these are
2021.
all
2021.
Sorry,
Yeah.
2021. I think it's highly unlikely, and I feel for many industries and many events. I'm not sure I can watch my beloved 49ers play in the Super Bowl again. I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to happen. I mean,
I don't think that's going to happen either. Not the 49ers anyway. No.
Yeah. Well, I'm moving to Seattle, so I may go with the Seahawks this time, since I'm a fair weather fan.
All right. Well, I just, believe it or not, I moved in the middle of this pandemic, and I'm in Boulder, Colorado right now. I moved from Tucson. So.
Oh.
So.
Well, you know what? Your weather is a lot nicer there in Boulder than Tucson. At
This time of year for sure. So
you don't have 110 degree weather.
Yeah. So Yobi, you're one of these amazing people who, whenever you see a problem, you create a system to fix that problem. And in a lot of cases, that system is a business. And so can you walk me through the story of how, you started a business, correct me if I'm wrong, you started a business in response to COVID-19. Is that not correct?
That is correct. But before I get into that, a lot of the COVID-19 work actually started with a company that I am a partner in called PA Consulting. Or PA Consulting is a global consulting organization where we have 5,000 employees, revenue about, $1 billion or so, and we're global. And we have been very involved in particularly in the UK, in the fight against COVID-19. We led in the UK the manufacture of the ventilators that are now deployed in the UK. On the other hand, I made some very serious investments in companies that are in the testing business, and that company is called Crown Global Biotech. I did that because it's funny how this happened. It happened because I was in Facebook. I was brought into a group into Facebook as early as February, actually, and they were talking about the coronavirus. And I had already, through some of my investments, have already worked on COVID-19 issues in China, in Wuhan, China, actually.
Wow.
So the company that I work with donated hundreds of thousands of test kits to China. So we were aware of the situation, and as early as February, very early February, I said, this is not going to end up good. And I went to that Facebook group, and and everybody, and I felt bad about this. A lot of people were just complaining and saying like, "Oh, this is terrible. This is this. This is that." And I felt that, as you said earlier, I felt I needed to do something. And since I have a fundamental understanding of the technologies that are going to be necessary for this, I said, like, look, let's go make an investment, a serious investment in to deliver solutions that would benefit the world. And we have been, and frankly, I've been very fortunate. We shipped about 1 million test kits to Chile, about 1 million to Israel. We are shipping test kits right now to India. We ship test kits to South Korea. And of course, here in the United States, we have shipped test kits over to various states and cities here in the United States to the tune of about 400,000 tests. So we feel that we're making a considerable contribution to the fight against this disease.
Mm-hmm.
You know, testing, I was a little bit disturbed today. Without going into the politics of this, there are people who are in positions of power who are saying like, we may not need tests, and that tests are being overplayed. However, that denies the science behind this, Ron. The science behind this is that it's highly contagious. We all know that. But the other thing is that asymptomatic people, asymptomatic, by the way, for the rest of the audience out there, means that people without symptoms can transmit the virus. So, you can have the virus and you will not exhibit any symptoms. You will have, in fact, there are people who have the virus who never have symptoms, and they're just simply carriers.
And they don't even know it, since a lot of
They don't know it.
No.
And because they don't know it, they become spreaders. Even worse, they become super spreaders.
Yeah.
In South Korea, where our company did some initial work, the contagion in South Korea happened in a city called Daegu and was spread by one woman who infected 16 people. That initial spread to 16 people became tens of thousands.
Yeah.
And that is the reason why testing is critical, because you need to be able to separate asymptomatics or people without symptoms away from people who are vulnerable.
Right.
And that includes our parents, our grandparents. And interestingly enough, Ron, you may or may not have heard this. We now have a pediatric syndrome that is spiking in New York, which affects young children. And it's a pediatric inflammatory condition that causes heart failure in children. So because it's a novel virus, we don't know anything about this other than the fact that people with no symptoms can be walking around. That's why we need to figure out who these asymptomatics are, because we need to separate them. We need to keep them away from the healthy population until such time that we have a vaccine.
Right. So, when people say, wear your mask because you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting others. There's big truth to that, because I could have the virus right now and not know it, and you could have it. And so if I just want to go out and have a party, or go to a party, or go to a restaurant and sit next to somebody, I could be infecting them, and they could be in a high risk population. Right there.
Extremely. I mean, and the virus is this is probably not a great statement to make, right? But I will say it anyway. The virus is a beautiful virus. It performs as viruses should. It is cunning. It is very adaptable, and it mutates like any other virus and adapts to its host and condition. And that, I say the way it's beautiful because it's a living organism that has evolved to to protect itself and allow itself to mutate and grow and spread like any other living organism. But it is also, we don't know anything about this virus. We just don't know how mutations happen. We don't know even today how many mutations there are. The last count, and this count was from Iceland, actually. It was either Iceland or Finland that did a mutation count, and they came up with 35 mutations of the virus already. Already we know through research and verified science that the virus that comes from Italy is deadlier than the virus that came from China. So they're both coronaviruses, they're both novel coronaviruses, but they're different mutations.
Yeah.
And and you can see actually geographically, if you analyze the United States, right, how the deadlier mutation has spread rapidly in the East Coast. Remember, the travel from Europe to the East Coast between Italy, France, Germany is quite large. It's just a natural entry point for Europeans to fly into New York to go anywhere else in the country. Vice versa, over in the West Coast, Ron. People from Asia, their first landing point when they go to the United States is San Francisco, Los Angeles,
Yep.
maybe Seattle, Washington. And you can see from the mutations and the death rates, that the death rates in the East Coast are far larger than the death rates over in the West Coast.
That's interesting. We've got a bunch of people watching. And people are checking in. Hey, Guy, Justin, Stefan, Dominic, and Lauren, and everybody else who's chiming in. Feel free to ask questions. We've got the expert on board today, so don't be shy. Jump in here with questions. So how does your test kits differ from other test kits that are out there?
That's a really interesting question. So I have to give, in order to initiate this discussion, I have to go and tell you what the landscape of test kits are. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't really understand, and because it's not easy to understand, frankly. So first of all, there are three types of tests in general. One's called a PCR test, and that is analyzing the RNA and the DNA of the virus in order to verify the presence of the virus. The second test is called an antibody test or a serology test. This involves the extraction of blood, usually a finger prick, and then you run it through a test. And actually, I'm going to go show you some of these tests later. In fact, maybe later I'll have you go and do a little monologue while I go and grab the test kits.
Okay.
But anyway, the second test kit is the serology and antibody, and the third one is called an antigen test. The antigen tests are fast, but they're not accurate. They're by nature not accurate. The most accurate ones are tests that are called PCR tests. These are very sophisticated machines. They're very large. There are many manufacturers. The biggest manufacturer in the RT-PCR, in the real-time PCR machine space, is a company called Thermo Fisher. But there are many. You have heard of Abbott. You've heard of Roche. There's Hologic. There are that makes the Panther machines. There is Cepheid that makes another PCR machine. There's just several of them. They're very accurate, but most of the inaccuracy of these tests come from two fundamental problems. The first thing is collection. To do a PCR test, right, you basically will go and get a swab. Okay, and let me go and show you what it might be. Right, here is a swab, right, and I'm going to waste it, but I'll open it just to give people a sense of what this might look like. This swab, by the way, is comes in two flavors. The first flavor is so here's a swab, right? The first flavor is a throat swab. So you would take this and you would collect mucus samples by harvesting mucus from the very back of your throat by your tonsils. There's a variant or a variation of this swab that is nasal. You basically about 3 inches to 4 inches up, you bring it up to your nose, or a medical professional will bring it up to your nose and then extract the same mucus samples, and then you would put that in what's called a collection tube, right? So whether you do nasal or whether you do throat, you would take this and put it in here, in the collection tube, okay? Now, there's a little liquid over there, right? And that liquid comes in 3 varieties, which I'm going to talk about. And this is a little geeky, but this is very interesting. So you take this out, you bend this, it clips out, you close it. And then once you close this, you would put your name, right? You would put your name in there, and then the date and time, and then you would send it to the lab. Okay, seems simple enough. This liquid here is called a reagent. Just think about it as a special chemical. There are 3 types of what's called transport media. This is called the transport media, basically the liquid here. The first one is called UTM, Universal Transport Medium. It means that you can put virus, bacteria, fungi, feces, urine, whatever, wherever you want to get your sample from in this. And a UTM generally, most of the UTM is made out of saline. Think about that for a moment. It's made out of saline. Okay, it's very similar to the saline that you could see in a drugstore for your contact lens solution. Slightly different, but by and large, it's salt and water, several different types of salts and water. The problem with saline is that the virus that you just harvested, harvested the most infectious virus that is circulating in the planet. You put it in here, right? And guess what happens? You now have live virus in this tube that you're sending downstream to all the way to the lab. Now, interestingly enough, to do that, you have to put this, the UTM, Universal Transport Medium, in ice or dry ice, because it normally takes anywhere from 18 hours to 24 hours, sometimes 36 hours, for this to get to the lab. And then in the lab, it goes and gets tested, right? So that the problem is there are several people who are handling this very contagious virus, right? All the way from the patient, all the way to the lab. When the sample is not collected properly, you get a false negative. Mm-hmm. The second problem is when it's not stored properly in ice, you basically degrade RNA. RNA, or ribonucleic acid, is what you actually analyze in the PCR machine. The problem is RNA is very unstable. It degrades by the 18th hour from the time it's collected, it degrades, and degraded RNA equals false negative. Okay, so now there's the other media called VTM, viral transport medium. So viral transport medium is generally made out of bovine extracted media, meaning gelatin. The purpose of VTM, right, the design purpose of VTM is actually to preserve the virus, right? And to preserve that virus so that that virus can be cultured in a lab. Because virologists, remember before COVID, we don't have widespread virus testing, right? So VTM was actually designed so that a virologist and a clinician can go and send this to a lab, the VTM, and then it would be analyzed in a PCR machine, and it would be verified by a viral culture, meaning you would now put this in agar, for example, and culture it and see if it will grow, whether it's bacteria, virus, fungi, whatever it is. So it was designed to carry live viruses. We don't want that. This is a very, very convoluted and complicated supply chain, if you think about it that way. From the time you collect it, the nurse collects it, or the doctor, or the healthcare worker, it is going to move through many hands. It may move to the nurse who's like cataloging it in the table. Then it moves to another person who picks up the bag of tests or the ice box full of tests. And then it moves to a courier. And then it moves to some receiving agent in the lab. Then it moves to the lab technician, et cetera, et cetera. These things break, by the way, these little plastic things. And when these break, it's what I call a bio warfare weapon, as far as I'm concerned. This thing is full of the most contagious virus on the planet and should not be fiddled with. To answer now the question of why our medium is different, our medium is called DNA RNA shield. The reason why it's different is when you put the virus, the mucus sample that you collected in our RNA shield, it automatically kills the virus. So the virus is dead, no more. It can do no harm. The second thing why this is different is because it doesn't require ice. It doesn't require dry ice. It doesn't require refrigeration. And the third thing why this is very different is we will preserve the RNA, not the virus, the RNA of the virus for 30 days or longer. So it makes up for any lag time between collection and lab. And the lag time always happens because you have transport, you have airplanes, you have cars, you have people, etc. So it could take up to 48 hours to get for this to get there. And if the RNA degrades, it basically screws up everything, and it doesn't work.
Wow, that sounds like a fascinating innovation. And what was really interesting is when you said that we, up until COVID-19, didn't have widespread testing infrastructure in place. And so I imagine, or at least I hope, that coming out that right now, as we speak, that is all being put online, and that's going to have something. That's going to be something that we can carry forward to the next crisis, or have something that's something that we will carry through. How about if we just steer the conversation a little bit towards what you see the post COVID-19 world as being? Where everybody's talking about, going back to normal. And I'm just wondering what normal is going to be that we're going to go back to. And I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that. I think you're frozen. Or am I frozen? Yobie, are you there? Somebody who's listening online, send me a note to see if we're still live and if you guys can hear me. because I'm trying to figure out if it's me or if it's Yobie. Okay, folks, I think we lost Yobie. So I'm still here. So this might be my monologue. This is what this is what when Yobie said I was going to do a monologue. I guess this is it. Okay, I think he's back. Let's see if he's back.
Sorry, we had a slight hiccup there. I don't
No worries.
know
I thought that was my cue to start my monologue.
No, we have a very interesting question here from Mark. Let's try to answer this one because this is a very good question from Mark. Let me go and try to pull it out.
Yeah, I got it. Do viruses mutate to ultimately reduce the lethality so it can continue to reside in the host, being living beings? Killing the host, it would seem, to not be in the interest of the virus. Thank you for your enlightening conversation. That's from Mark.
Mark, that's a really interesting question. So there are two viruses that come to mind in this, Ron. The first one is Ebola, and the second one is MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is super deadly, by the way. Ebola. So Ebola, by the way, was stopped in its track because it was super efficient in killing its host. It basically burned itself out. It couldn't find any more hosts. And the number one solution to stopping the Ebola crisis in West Africa was, in fact, contact tracing. To be able to separate the people who were sick or those who got in contact with sick people. The same is true for MERS, or the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. It also burned itself out because it actually killed all its hosts. And it was also managed largely by contact tracing. It seems that killing its host, right, would not be smart for the virus, right? Has Mark alluded to in his question, but the virus knows this, right? So it makes up for the lack of a permanent host of that host by being so infectious, so it can go to many hosts. This is the adaptability of the virus, right? It goes and says, whoa, if I stay here and this host dies, then I die. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, and as a virus, I'm going to go to as many hosts as I can so I don't die. So I perpetuate my longevity as a virus. Anyway.
So it's a superorganism, basically. It's a bunch of individual organisms acting as a single organism with a single overarching goal. That's
fascinating,
quite
actually.
interesting. So
I just want to go and address two other questions, Ron, and
sure.
The antibody test. So what are the antibody tests? And this is where I'm going to ask you to go in a brief monologue of about a minute.
All right.
I'm going to get it. Yeah, I'm just going to go get it, just 2 seconds,
Okay. All right. I'll take that as the stream. So while Yobie's gone, I just want to put a pitch out to everybody to send me suggestions for folks that you want to hear on our Friday afternoon conversation, Sheltered in Place. I'm really looking for some great folks to have a conversation with, and folks who will help us navigate this crisis. And I think Yobie is back.
So these are the tests that we have. I'm very proud of the fact that this test is made in the United States of America. And this is not made in a backwater lab or imported from somewhere else. This is made, by the way, in New Jersey. And, people say, why do you like this particular test? Well, I said, I have a very simple explanation. It's an American company. But even more than that, these guys have product liability insurance. That might be a funny, an odd thing to say, but this company has a lot to lose. So they have put in a lot of effort and a lot of R&D into coming up with a superior product and an accurate product. You know, the way this works is when you open it, right? You basically have this. So you basically take a blood sample, a finger prick, and then you put it in there and you put a reagent, and then it's kind of like a pregnancy test. Except in a pregnancy test, you want to be positive because that's cool. Here, you want to be negative. You don't want to be positive on this one. This, by the way, detects antibodies. The only problem here, right, Ron, is, as you know, your basic biology, high school biology, antibodies form after an infection is already completed. Basically, your body has produced these antibodies that attack and try to kill the coronavirus. And that is what this actually detects. So that means,
so you said you wanted to come back negative, not positive. Why wouldn't you want to have antibodies for coronavirus?
no. I guess I misspoke on that one. I mean, I want to be known as, I want to have the antibodies, meaning,
or maybe
but you also, yeah, I think I misspoke on that one. So I apologize to the audience, but you do want, if you don't have the antibodies, it means you can deduce, although you cannot guarantee 100%, that you don't have the coronavirus, right? It comes negative, it means you don't have the antibodies, and it can say maybe you don't have the coronavirus.
Right. And we don't know.
Not a,
and we don't know at this point how long the antibodies last for, and whether or not you're contagious if you have that. I mean, you could have had it 3 months ago and they could still be, there's no trace of the virus in you anymore. It's been defeated, but you still have the antibodies floating around and you're still testing positive for the antibodies.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the most interesting developments is that there is some promise in the plasma studies. People have been donating plasma. There is a clinical study being done in Stanford, a clinical study being done in the University of Washington. I think there are clinical studies looking at plasma and antibodies going on in many parts of the world. And apparently there is some promise. However, they're not quite sure yet. I mean, clinical studies are not trivial. I mean, and in particular, you don't want to have bad clinical studies because this particular virus involves a human life, right? You really want to go and make sure that you're testing not only your testing but your clinical studies are good and accurate.
Right. So what do you think the world's going to look like on the other side of this? Before I say that, how are we going to get on the other side of this, first of all? And then what do you think the world's going to look like once we come out the other side? What's the path, and what's the path to the destination, and what's the destination?
Well, I'm only speaking. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a nurse. I'm not a virologist. But I've read. I'm a very discerning reader, and the research that I read an average of about 4 papers regarding this a day, literally a day. I mean, the papers are crazy. They're coming out daily. It's hard to catch up, actually, but there are things that are known. One thing that's known is the only way for the world to actually defeat this virus is to have a vaccine. That's the other side. That's the goal. Without a vaccine, we're going to be in this modified workplace kind of environment for a very long time. At PA Consulting, actually, we are helping some fairly large multinational companies go back to work. And part of the strategy that we have been bringing forth is to bring a little bit of common sense, but a little bit of innovative thinking. So the common sense ones are pretty straightforward: social distancing, reconfiguration of the workplace, temperature checks, recategorizing employees from low risk employees to high risk employees. We still don't know the legal ramifications.
And
of that,
that's not risk of getting the infection. That's risk to the person if they get the infection, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, for example, a young 24-year-old, no underlying conditions, non-diabetic, would be category A. You can go to work right now. You can have category D people, which we, because we in the studies that in the work we're doing, we're seeing 5 categories of people, and the highest risk we just called an E, E class, and the E category. These are people with underlying conditions. Here's an example: cancer survivor, right? They've gone into remission in cancer. Asthmatics, like people with asthma, people with high blood pressure. In New York, 33% of the deaths were diabetics.
Mm.
So, and then another significant group, overweight people. In particularly obese people are very much at risk.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why. This is the weird thing. It's like none of us know why all of this is happening. We just don't know. I mean, there's so much that it's really difficult to go and make any prognostications on what the future will look like without a vaccine.
Right.
Because without a vaccine,
vaccines take, sometimes years to develop.
Correct. The fastest vaccine that was ever developed was the MMR vaccine. Mumps, mumps and rubella, the MMR, that was 5 years.
Mm.
And I will remind people that HIV is almost 40 years old, and we still don't have a vaccine. Although in HIV, we have some very good therapeutics that allow you to continue to live your life. But vaccines are very, very difficult to achieve. I mean, I'm not sure that we're going to get out without a vaccine. That said, the vaccine issue is multiple. There are about 200 vaccine research projects right now. 19 of them are deemed by both the US government, the EU, and various countries say have some promise. But even if we discovered a vaccine, right, we have other challenges. One of the key challenges is that the global vaccine production capacity is quite limited. I don't believe we don't have the capacity, for example, to make more than 200 million tests as a world.
Wow.
And clearly in the United States, if you just took the US population, you have 330 million. You take Europe, 1 billion. You take China, 1.5 billion. You take India, 1.5 billion. You take all of Latin America and Central America, that's another billion. We have to make billions of these vaccines. We do not have the production capacity right now. If we discovered a vaccine today and we put it through the current vaccine infrastructure, it would take us also 2 years to 3 years to actually disseminate the vaccine.
Yeah.
So there is going to be, and frankly, to me, I'm also looking at this. I'm looking at making a big investment in a vaccine factory in Florida, because we have to make this vaccine here in the United States. Right now, there's not really a very strong vaccine manufacturing infrastructure in the United States. Most of the vaccine infrastructure, guess where it is? Not in the United States. France, which is Sanofi, has it. Switzerland has it. China has it. India has it. As far as the United States is concerned, our vaccine manufacturing capability is not very good. Let's put it that way.
Mm. Well, hopefully we're going to be
So
building that infrastructure as we go.
we have to make that infrastructure, but it's a delicate matter, right? If you think about it, if I have to build a vaccine factory today, right, I would need tens of millions of dollars to do so, without the promise of a client.
Right.
And what do I mean by that? I don't know if a vaccine will come up. Yet I have to go and spend tens of millions of dollars to do a vaccine production capability so that it's ISO certified, so that it's in a sterile environment, so that it can do massive single doses, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, there is a big business opportunity in vaccine production, but it's a highly, highly, highly risky business proposition because we may never get to the vaccine.
Right.
So this is where government comes into play, why it's important for national governments to actually make an investment in something that is so unclear and uncertain, and that is vaccine production.
Right.
Without vaccine production, we can make all the we can discover 19 vaccines. It's not gonna. It's kind of like, so what?
Well, there's also besides vaccine production, we need PPE production, we need test kit production, we need
correct.
There's a whole virus infrastructure or virus combating infrastructure that we need to put in place. It doesn't exist at the moment.
The big problem in all of these, it's like the need is so large. We're a planet of 6 billion, if I'm correct, right? About
7.5, I think.
7.5 billion people. To serve the needs of 7.5 billion people is a massive undertaking. Not everybody is in a Seattle like myself, or San Francisco, or Boulder, Colorado. I mean, there are people who live in the Navajo reservation, which is very rural. People who live in refugee camps in the middle of war zones. People who live in poor countries. Think Mali. Think, the Sierra Leone. Think, certain countries in South America. Bolivia. It's hard.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is the reason why we have to think of those places is because what affects one part of the world affects everything else. If a major outbreak happens in Sierra Leone, it's going to affect the rest of the world. And so this virus is showing us quite clearly and undeniably that we are literally all in this together and that we need to work together.
One of the most profound observations came from a scientist that used to work in the CDC, and I forget his name, but I cannot forget the quote. Coronavirus somewhere is coronavirus everywhere.
Right. So what do you think the implications are for our future? I mean, how are humans going to have to act differently moving forward out of this?
I think I'm going to throw that question back over to you because I know you and I have worked. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, Ron and I are working on a project to bring a message of hope, goodwill, global collaboration to everyone in the planet, not just to Americans, not just to the Chinese, not just to the Indians. And I would actually throw that question back to Ron because
all right,
how are we going to get out of this? It's because, this point of view that we're just one planet and we're one system, and this planet is a closed system.
That's right.
It's like the space station. It's a closed system, and in this system, everything's got to work, and we got to work together to make it a livable place. And
Yeah.
I'm going to throw that back to you.
All right. You know, it's funny. It's funny. I had, when you were showing the test kits and breaking off the thing, and I was having flashbacks to being on the space station, because we used very, very similar test kits for all the experiments we were doing up there. But
By the way, I will say this. Guess whose test kit is in your space station?
I don't know.
Our test kit. We are the only NASA certified collection and transport kit. All your human samples, feces, urine, blood that's collected in the space station uses.
Okay,
this.
well maybe that's why it looks so familiar. because it's identical. So yeah, I think, you know, we talked about a lot of the differences coming from. We're going to have to build infrastructure, right? We're going to have to build a defense mechanism, a defense system for the next virus that comes down, or the next crisis that comes down the chute. I think what is getting us through this crisis right now is what we call in the space business exhibiting expeditionary behavior. That means taking care of yourself, taking care of those people around you, and with the goal to be able to contribute to the overarching mission that you're trying to accomplish. And so whether that overarching mission is the health of your family, it's you know, the survival of your company, it's whatever that is the overarching mission. And you don't do the team any good if you yourself are not acting efficiently and performing efficiently, because you're stressed out, you're tired, you're sick. And so we really need to have self-awareness to realize things like stress and fear and what they do to our immune system, and basically have self-care. Once you have self-care and you yourself are operating at a high efficiency, or at 100%, then you need to start looking for telltale signs from your crewmates, from your teammates, from your neighbors, from your family members, from your coworkers, that they're under stress, that you know, maybe they're talking too much, maybe they're talking not more than usual, maybe they're talking less than usual, maybe, you know, they look tired, maybe they look like they're dealing with something. And, you know, that extends to our neighbors too. Even though we're all sheltered in place and we really can't go out and socialize, that doesn't mean that if you've seen for the last, you know, 10 years, your neighbor come out every Thursday morning pulling down the garbage can, and you don't see them this Thursday morning, and you know they're home, you know, maybe we should check on them. And so what I hope comes out of this is a greater spirit of community, a greater spirit of one human family, of you know, the knocking down of the ridiculous thoughts that things like viruses need passports to get across borders, or greenhouse gases, or anything else. We live in a highly interdependent, profoundly interwoven fabric of life that is the biosphere known as Earth. And that two-dimensional map that hangs in the classrooms around the world that shows our world with all the nation states on it, that is an artificial world that we created. It doesn't reflect the true nature of the world that we live in. If we're going to deal with this crisis, and we're going to overcome it and overcome all the other crises and the other real problems that we face, we have to do that in the context of the real world. And politics and sound bites and all that is going to have no bearing on that. The truth of the matter is, we live in a highly interdependent, interconnected world. And the only way we can problem solve any problem is to deal with the problem in the context of the real world. And so that's what I think comes out of this. And in more practical terms, I think social distancing is going to be something that's going to be around for a while. We're going to need to be smart about it. You know, right now, because we didn't have systems in place, we've kind of, you know, knee-jerked way on one side of the spectrum with that. I think the more we learn about this virus and other viruses, and how it's spread and how long it lasts out of a host and things like that, I think we'll be able to fine-tune that social distancing. I think we need to restructure a lot of how we do things, like fund vaccine production facilities and things like that we talked about, all around building the infrastructure. And so I think what we need to come out of this is kind of like when World War II ended and we built the international interstate road system, you know, because we saw that we needed infrastructure. We're in the same case. We're going to come out of this war with coronavirus, and we're going to have to be into a massive infrastructure building phase. And part of that's going to be things like vaccine production facilities and PPE production facilities and test kit production facilities and things like that. So That's
Yeah,
my 2 cents.
no, it's not 2 cents, buddy. That's 2 million. It's a big number. But the point is, this is where, if there's anything I want to leave, our friends over who are listening to us, is that we truly are just one planet. I mean, it's like just one biosphere. So I hate to take it back to something that has been politicized, but the wearing of masks. Okay. I just want to go and have a brief comment on that. When you wear a mask, mask wearing only works when everybody wears it. It really doesn't work when if there were 100 people in a room and only one person, okay, does not wear a mask, it doesn't work, because that single person may be asymptomatic, and that single person could be, and this virus is so so efficient. It stays on plastic surfaces. There was a study that was done by the CDC, and they analyzed the cruise ships. It stayed on the surface of cruise ships in various objects and stuff in a cruise ship for 17 days.
Oh, wow.
17. All right. The Chinese study, there was a study in China that said 7 days. Then there was an NIH study that said it stays up for 3 days. Regardless of whether it's 3 days or 17 days, the fact is this virus knows how to live outside of a human host living on an inanimate object. It could be a toilet seat. It could be, it could be some, plastic plate. It could be, I don't know. I have no clue what it could live in. But we know, based on studies that were conducted, that it lives outside the human body for extended periods of time. It also, in the air, a study was released 3 days ago on how long the virus, technically it's not an aerosol virus. And that's good, because aerosol viruses like measles are very dangerous because they stay suspended in air for a really long time. This has the ability to be suspended in air because it's droplets, or like, think about it as when you do a spray gun, right? You can see this when you spray, Glade or whatever in the air, and you can see the particles, particularly when you do it against the light. Thank God it's not that. It's not an aerosol virus, but it still lasts for 8 minutes in the air. Yeah. So that single person in that 100, just by touching other stuff in the room or just by talking,
yeah,
allows the virus to go and contaminate others.
Right.
When I see we're having such a good time here, Ron, we're like used up the entire hour.
Well, we'll have to do another one.
Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. I mean, you're not just wearing a mask for yourself. You're wearing it for everybody else.
Yeah.
That's part of what I was talking about when I was talking about expeditionary behavior. But Yobie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on and sharing all the knowledge and wisdom and advice. Especially thank you on your birthday. I hope you have a wonderful birthday.
Thank you.
Sorry that you're locked away. Locked away for it.
My kids are coming by later, so it'll be good. So
all right.
Thank God they're adults already. I got to test them before they come in the house.
All right, good. And thanks to everybody who tuned in and everybody who is making comments and asking questions. Yeah. And we're looking forward to seeing you next week, same time next week, next Friday. Yeah, so with that,
thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Keep safe, everybody.